On March 23, 2021, in Seoul, a man came to the door of an apartment where a mother and her two daughters lived. He was not a relative, a friend, or a neighbor. No one was expecting him. 2 days later, police found all 3 women inside that apartment dead. The suspect himself was still inside. He would turn out to be 24-year-old Kim Tae-hyun, a man who had met one of the daughters through an online game. At first, he was just someone from the internet, a nickname, a message, a voice in a game, but at some point, that was no longer enough for him. How did an ordinary online acquaintance reach someone else's front door? And when did the person behind the screen become a real threat? This story began in a fairly ordinary way. It started around November 2020 with an online game, more specifically League of Legends. A regular game where people often meet, talk without any serious commitment, and spend a lot of time together without even knowing each other in real life. That is how Kim Tae-hyun met one of the young women. People play together, message each other, talk, add each other as friends, and sometimes continue communicating outside the game. At some point, the person on the other side of the screen stops being just a random nickname. They gain a voice, a habit of replying, a place in everyday life. But stories like this have one problem. The same contact can be understood in completely different ways by 2 different people. For one person, it may just be communication, normal, pleasant, but temporary. Today, people talk, tomorrow they stop. Nobody promised anyone anything. Nobody is obligated to always reply, explain every disappearance, or keep the contact going just because the other person has grown used to it. But for other person, the same communication can begin to mean much more. And not because a real relationship has actually formed between them, but because he himself starts giving it more meaning. He gets used to the attention, used to the replies, used to the feeling that this person should now be available. And this is where the first dangerous imbalance appears. Often, it begins with a wrong understanding of boundaries. One person thinks, we are just talking. The other starts acting as if communication with him is oath. He starts waiting for an answer, taking silence personally, looking for explanations where the other person simply no longer wants to continue the contact. And gradually, ordinary distance starts to feel like a personal insult. We cannot know exactly what Kim Tae-hyun was thinking at the very beginning when their communication had just started, but from the way the case later developed, the main thing becomes clear. He did not see this contact as something that could end by the other person's choice. For him, judging by what happened after, it gradually became a fixation. And at some point, ordinary online communication stopped being just communication. It became the beginning of a chain that would later lead him to that very door. The turning point came after their communication had already moved beyond the game. According to Korean sources, in January 2021, they met in person several times. At first, this could still have looked like the continuation of an ordinary acquaintance, a game, a real-life meeting, mutual acquaintances from the same gaming environment. But after one of those meetings, a conflict occurred. The next day, the young woman made it clear that she no longer wanted to see him. After that, she blocked him. This is where story could have ended. Not with a crime, simply with one person ending the contact and the other accepting it. According to police, after being blocked, Kim Tae-hyun did not disappear. He tried to reach her again through other means. He called her from a public phone in order to bypass the block. He tried to pass messages through mutual acquaintances from the same gaming environment. This is the essence of stalking. It is not necessarily one sudden moment after which everything immediately becomes obvious. More often, it is a chain of actions where a person keeps trying to appear again and again in the life of someone who has already made it clear that they do not want contact. For the young woman, this was a frightening situation where a person she was trying to remove from her life kept coming back. And the most disturbing part is that by then, he was no longer just messaging her from the internet. He knew where she lived. After being blocked, he went to the area where she lived and waited nearby until evening. Exactly how he obtained her address is not fully clear from the publicly available materials. At this stage, this was no longer just obsessive communication, it was stalking. An online game, in-person meetings, a conflict, a block, calls, messages through acquaintances, appearances near her home. The story had not yet reached the crime, but it was already moving in that direction. According to Korean sources, before the crime he contacted her again through the game, but not as Kim Tae-hyun himself. He used another gaming account, changed his nickname, and did not reveal who he really was. Through this communication he found out important information, her work schedule. In particular, that on March 23rd she would be at work. And this is where the story takes an even darker tone. Because he was no longer just trying to communicate, he was collecting information. He was checking when she would not be home. He used trust and ordinary gaming communication as a way to obtain details that would later become part of the crime. Now, his actions no longer look like a chaotic attempt to restore contact, but like movement toward a specific goal. And now, the main question was no longer whether would he try to contact her again. It was what he would do with the information he had obtained. On March 23, 2021, Kim Tae-hyun came to an apartment in the Nowongu district of Seoul. By that point, he already knew the address. He also knew that the older daughter would be at work that day. According to the investigation, to get inside, he pretended to be a delivery worker. The younger daughter was in the apartment at that moment. Suspecting nothing terrible, she simply opened the door. After that, he attacked her with a knife. When he was done with the younger daughter, Kim did not leave, he stayed and waited. According to investigation, Kim Tae-hyun waited for the mother and the older daughter to return. And this is one of the most important facts in the case, because several hours passed between the first attack and the return of the others. He had a chance to leave, to stop, to not continue what he had started. But he stayed. When the mother came home, she entered the apartment without knowing that a stranger was already inside. For her, it was an ordinary moment of coming home, but the situation inside the apartment had already changed. As soon as she entered, she became his next victim. Later, the older daughter came home, the same young woman he had met through the game and had been stalking before this. By that point, everything that had begun as an online acquaintance had fully crossed into reality. The address, the door, the apartment, the killings. He attacked her as well. All three victims were found with multiple stab wounds. That is how a story that had begun several months earlier with an ordinary online game reached her family's apartment. This does not explain the crime, and it does not make it logical, but it shows that it did not appear in a single day. After the killings, Kim Tae-hyun did not leave the apartment. He remained there for several more days. There was no attempt to return to normal life, no clear after. He simply stayed at the crime scene. On March 25th, police entered the apartment. Inside, they found the bodies of 3 women. Kim Tae-hyun was there as well. He had self-inflicted wounds, but he was alive. After that, he was taken to the hospital and then arrested. For society, this story was shocking not only because of the brutality of the crime. The shock also came from how ordinary the beginning of this chain had looked. An online game, several meetings, a conflict, a block, attempts to make contact again, appearing near the home, another gaming account, a work schedule, an apartment. When the case became known, it quickly began to be seen not just as a murder case, but a stalking case. Because even before the crime there had already been signs of stalking. He did not accept rejection, searched for ways around blocked contact, and moved closer to the young woman's real life, even though she had already tried to distance herself from him. Later, police revealed his face and name. In South Korea, this does not happen automatically in every case. Usually, such a decision is made when the crime is especially serious, there is public interest, and there are sufficient grounds to consider the person a suspect. That is how the name Kim Tae-hyun became known across the country. But even after that, the main question did not disappear, because the name and the face give society a specific criminal, but they do not explain why the chain leading to the crime was allowed to go so far. After his arrest, the Kim Tae-hyun case quickly became one of the most discussed cases in South Korea. Prosecutors demanded the death penalty for him. For the prosecution, this was not simply the murder of 3 people, but a carefully planned crime. He knew the address, found out the work schedule, came to the apartment, and entered by pretending to be a delivery worker. But the court did not sentence him to death. In October 2021, Kim Tae-hyun received a life sentence. Later, the appellate court upheld the verdict, and the Supreme Court of South Korea ultimately confirmed the life sentence. The Kim Tae-hyun case became one of the cases that forced South Korea to speak much more seriously about stalking, not as obsessiveness after rejection, and not as a personal conflict, but as behavior that can turn into a physical threat. Before 2021, stalking in Korea was often treated too lightly. It could be classified as a minor offense, with punishment limited to a small fine. In 2021, South Korea introduced a separate anti-stalking law. It is important to be precise here. The law was passed literally the day after the killings, before this case had become fully known to the public. So it cannot be said that the Kim Tae-hyun case itself created this law, but it did become one of the high-profile cases that showed why the old approach was dangerous. The new law made stalking a separate crime and increased the punishment. Stalking could now lead to a prison sentence, and if it was committed with a weapon or a dangerous object, the punishment became even harsher. But even that was not enough to close the problem. In the following years, new high-profile stalking cases occurred in Korea, and after them, the law began to be revised again. In 2023, it was changed further. This shows one simple thing. Society was gradually learning to see stalking not as unpleasant communication, but as a risk that requires early intervention. Kim Tae-hyun received life in prison, but for a free woman, that sentence could no longer change anything. And that is the heaviest part of this case. A verdict can punish the criminal, but it cannot bring back the dead. This case is not only a story about brutal murder, it is a story about how stalking can look not that serious until it becomes too late. If you're interested in real crime stories from East Asia, not only the crimes themselves, but also what leads to them, subscribe to the channel. Here, we examine not just what happened, but how it became possible.